I'm joined today with Melissa Scher, Director of Immigration at UMass Chan Medical School. And Melissa's not your average global mobility leader. She is responsible for leading a large, very complex in-house immigration program at UMass Chan Medical System. So, Melissa, can you start us off by sharing your background and your role at UMass Chan Medical School?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Laura. It's exciting to be on your podcast. A little bit about me. I've been in the field of immigration for over 20 years. I started off as an international student advisor for a business school outside of Boston. From there, I took the plunge and worked as a corporate immigration paralegal for two major corporate immigration law firms. And that was a wonderful opportunity to hit the ground running and learn about different visa categories that are not typical to higher education. And for the last 10 years, I have been working in the Immigration Services Office at the University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School. And as of last October, I became the office director.
Wow. I understand in your current role, you are managing multiple immigration programs for UMass, med students, full-time employees, and more that all have very specialized filings. Can you give us an overview about what you're doing there, how you're leading those very specialized programs and making those filings, preparing those filings in-house with your team at the Immigration Services Office?
Sure. So I report to the Executive Director of People Operations, and my office is comprised of 3 full-time immigration specialists and 1 admin. My office sits within HR, and each immigration specialist is responsible for supporting the 60 departments and programs at the university, including a School of Medicine, a PhD program, as well as our graduate medical education. So as you mentioned, we handle all NIV work in-house, save for O1s and permanent residency cases. Each of my immigration specialists also support our clinical population of J1 alien physicians and clinical H1B visa holders. I have 1 immigration specialist who supports our entire F1 student program, and that responsibility carries throughout the OPT and STEM OPT periods. So they're getting support during their studies and after. And my office offers end-to-end case processing where part of the student and employee life cycle throughout their immigration journeys at the med school. And those journeys end either once they become a permanent resident or leave the university. And in addition to providing immigration support, we are responsible for I-9 compliance.
Wow. Okay. So running this large scale in-house program and with such a large population of, very specific visa classifications, what systems do you have in place to manage this kind of workflow?
So we use Synapsys as a case management system. It was originally built specifically for the F1 and J1 visa programs. It works well for the H-1B visa program and a few other NIV categories. It's not the best for tracking permanent residency cases, but again, it was not originally built for that. For those cases, I rely on outside counsel to provide a monthly report or monthly check-in meetings, or I log into their own case management systems to stay on top of those cases. We do use multiple systems, which can take some adjusting to because some of these systems don't communicate with one another. So I'm learning to spend more time in each system to really get to know the data and look at the population we're supporting. For example, every week I log into Tracker I-9, which is our I-9 vendor, and I'm checking our audit log and I'm running I-9 re-verification reports and I'm sending that information to my team. It's just another way for us to make sure we're staying compliant, tracking work authorization. And we also run reports through PeopleSoft HR as well as through Synapsys.
So you're kind of doing triple checks. So with each of these systems, it sounds like you run a report or you're asking a vendor to produce a report and then you're kind of cross-checking. Is that a manual process?
It's both. So there is a PeopleSoft feed into Synopsys for both our students and employees, but Tracker is something separate that I'm running with no feed. So you're right. And then, of course, because we have multiple law firms on retainer, I can't set up an API. So that is more manual and logging in. So it's a little bit of a combination of both.
Sounds like you're probably really good at Excel pivot tables.
Absolutely. Spent a little too much time in Excel.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I think, it's interesting. This has come up in some of our benchmarking, like how many programs folks are using. And it sounds like you have to be fluent in at least 4 systems.
Right.
Yeah. And what kind of training, are you expecting your team members to also be fluent in all 4, or is this sort of unique to your leadership role?
Right. Everyone is fluent in each because they're responsible for their own case management. So every immigration specialist has to understand Synopsys and have to understand the I-9 compliance. I do have what's called a Synopsys super user. And this person on my team, not only is she a super user, she's fantastic with data. And she has that technical mentality to just understand how things work. So I have to say, she's just a gift to have on the team. But other than that, everyone is expected to understand how our case management systems work and how we're able to pull reports because that's part of their responsibility to support our international community.
Super user sounds like a superstar. Always good to have on the team.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And so when you outsource some of the O1s or permanent residency process to law firms, can you tell us a little bit about what that handoff looks like, how you're managing it, how your immigration specialists are partnering with your outside law firms?
Right. So I manage that entire process. I manage our permanent residency program and I manage any O1s that go to outside counsel. So there's minimal involvement with my immigration specialists. I let them know that if someone's being sponsored for a green card, because they'll need to know if is that person qualified to extend their H-1B beyond the 6 years, or just to have an idea that this person is being supported in other ways. There's pros and cons to having multiple law firms on retainer, right? I mean, the pros is just this unlimited areas of expertise. There's predictable costs. But then the cons are, again, I can't set up an API with multiple law firms. There's different communication styles. There's different case management systems, different procedures. So sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge to stay on top of.
I have a lot of programs, mid to large size, that are thinking about or have asked me about bringing their program in-house. I don't know. I mean, do you have any guidance on, tips or tricks or where to get started or what, managing an in-house program looks like, just in case people are wondering? And we're getting this question more as a way to control costs, that they say, could we bring in some of these programs that our immigration specialists could do as opposed to, handing off to the outside legal counsel? So I don't know, any words of wisdom or how to get
right. I think it depends on your population. What are you thinking of supporting? I think the H-1B might be the easiest entry level if you want to start doing those in-house. Having worked in a corporate immigration law firm, I don't know about bringing an L1 in-house or an O1. So I would really think about the skills of your team. What is the population you're supporting? How many cases are you looking at? And of course, what do you have for a case management system? If you're doing this in-house, how are you going to file the H-1Bs? What type of training would they get? Now, there are organizations like, I will bring this up later on, like NAFSA, the International Advisors Association. They do have H-1B trainings, but that would be my big piece, is just making sure that your staff is trained. And how are they also just staying on top of changes? We're looking at changes to the H-1B regulations, which I'm losing track as to when the final rule might be coming out. Is it this year? Is it this quarter? So just making sure that your team is aware of that, and even just the service centers changing where you're filing cases.
Totally.
That can be a big issue. You're not paying attention to that and you're sending something to the wrong service center. You're not paying attention to fee increases. Does the asylum program apply to your program? Make sure you're connecting all those dots before you file a case.
How are you staying on top of all of it? Now that you put it all in perspective, like I rely on my colleagues and, we have best practices and someone's always updating a template. Like are you doing that?
So this is why we rely on outside counsel and
Okay.
very few law firms that I trust, like WR Immigration. I mean, I'm getting your email updates. I listen to your podcasts, and immigration is complex. We all know that. And it's really hard. You can't just look at the USCIS website and determine what a new rule might be or how to file an application. And then think about the multiple agencies we work with: Department of Labor, Department of State. And so to really have resources that we trust that can kind of break down what a new rule might be. And outside counsel, you're also kind of seeing the trends more than we are. You're coming back and saying, hey, we're seeing an increase in NIW RFEs. We're going to
Right.
change our manner or how we're going to file a case. Or you may be able to say, well, our office in Chicago is starting to see a trend in XYZ. And so we really rely on that to stay up to date, to stay trained, and to make sure that, we're doing the best that we can to support this community because they're relying on us to timely file petitions and file them correctly.
Totally. So what I'm hearing is, if you're a program that's thinking about bringing a piece or multiple pieces of your program in-house, it sounds like you still need trusted counsel to support as a sort of sounding board to ensure you're staying up to date. And it sounds like, thanks for the shout out, you're working with some talented people that you trust, but that also, probably making sure you've got some good case management software, that it's a lot of different pieces. So kudos to you for keeping it up and running, because I know, when you've got J1s, F1s, folks with like some pretty complex immigration history coming through your doors, that you're able to support them, like you said, end-to-end journeys is pretty impressive to do that successfully.
It's rewarding. It's really rewarding, I have to say. It's to see some of them newly arrive in F4J status, and then to see them eventually maybe move to an H-1B or a green card or open a lab, or even if they don't stay at the university, it's just to kind of watch them grow is always just so nice to see that.
It is pretty cool. I think that's the most rewarding part of our jobs, is sort of, helping these very talented individuals achieve the American dream, live their lives, contribute into the US. It's a very cool part of the job.
It is. And I always hear you say in the podcast, there's a net positive to U.S. immigration. I 100% agree with you. There really is. Like you said, think of what they're bringing their skills from abroad, but what they're contributing to our universities, our organizations. And I think I read recently, I can't remember the percentage, maybe it's 40% of Fortune 500 companies were started by immigrants. So just think of all the contributions that they're providing to our country.
100%. And it's cool to be part of that process, to make sure that they can contribute here and feel, safe and comfortable in their status in the United States, sort of the paperwork shuffling we're doing. But kind of transitioning, managing the challenges of an in-house program. So you've got, this complex program, you're successfully filing, but obviously with immigration, because it's complex, like issues pop up and trends change. And one issue I know that we talked about before in our prep call, and that's coming up with my other clients, is an issue that's preventing business as usual, rather, in this employment-based space, is administrative processing delays. So foreign nationals getting caught in visa stamping at U.S. consulates abroad. So this obviously happened to an intense degree during COVID, when, the pandemic really shut down travel. But we're still seeing administrative processing. So this means, some folks are able to move through consulates, but we're seeing high rates through the U.S. consulate and embassies out of China. Can you tell us how you're approaching this challenge? Because you have a lot of internal stakeholders I want you to talk about, and that kind of navigating all those conversations to keep everybody aware of what's going on, being proactive. Tell us how you're handling it.
Right. So administrative processing is probably one of my biggest pain points, in addition to Department of Labor processing times. But
Fair. Yeah.
we can talk about that another time.
Yeah.
So, we're seeing extremely lengthy visa delays coming from Iran, Russia, and China. And I find myself having conversations with departments and warning them that these visitors may not arrive. And we also have to think about the visitors themselves, particularly those coming from Iran and Russia, their inability to apply for a visa in their home country. The time and money spent applying through a third country, this includes them potentially needing a visa just to enter that country.
Right.
And then there's the visa fees. And then there's the SEVIS fees, which are specific to the F1 and J1 visa categories. And those can run from $220 to $350. And think about the costs around travel and lodging. And then while their applications are pending, maybe they're losing out on an opportunity to accept a job in their home country or a nearby country where maybe getting a work permit is not as stringent. And what I share with the departments as well as the visitors is that once a visa application is placed in administrative processing, our hands are tied. There's
Totally.
no ability to expedite it, and congressional assistance is not an option. So some of the other stakeholders I work with, in addition to the departments and our talent department, because they need to be aware that we're going to be pushing out start dates significantly due to someone's inability to arrive on time. I'm also working closely with our Office of Management because we have a guide on international engagement parameters. And, these guides are put in place concerning the limited ability to work abroad, taking company equipment, logging in from abroad. And it's a guide where multiple stakeholders are involved, including my office, my other colleagues in HR, and information systems. And I raise this as administrative processing cases can impact our current employees. If they're stuck abroad with no ability to work and they're tapping into their vacation, their personal time, once those days are exhausted, they're moving into an unpaid leave of absence. And this is where my colleagues and benefits get involved with the leave process, as well as the health insurance and retirement pieces are also impacted by being put on a leave of absence.
Wow. So it sounds like we've kind of got two groups that I heard two groups that you're sort of challenged with, like the sort of initial entry that might be coming in for their start date, whether that's their program start date, and the program doesn't wait for them, right? I remember in our prep call that it's like that delay in administrative processing could really challenge that person's ability to start their program on time, and they might be a year or more delayed if they miss enough or if the administrative processing delays are long enough, right?
Right, exactly. And this is unfortunately, we're seeing this coming from Iran, where female and male applicants are taking over a year to clear. And then in the meantime, projects have changed and funding has changed. And we've seen situations where offer letters are withdrawn. And it's very unfortunate.
Wow, that's heartbreaking. Okay, so that's sort of the first. So someone who's got this job offer with your institution, super excited about it. Basically, that opportunity gets canceled because of consular delays.
Right.
Ouch.
And as I brought up earlier, now they may have missed out on an opportunity to maybe look for another job in their home country because obviously they had this hope that this visa would clear and they could join their postdoc or whatever the role might be at UMass Chan. So now they're starting from scratch, trying to look for a job, and whether in their home country or, as I said, maybe a neighboring country might have less stringent work opportunities. I don't know. So it's such a challenge.
So that one's interesting and seems particularly maybe unique to higher education with, program start dates, but maybe not, program funding. Like I could see that happening in, the larger industry space or any kind of research. And then the second population I heard of challenges is, your full-time employees or, full-time students, whatever they might be, wanting to go home for vacation, for holiday. It could be an international conference and they have to, secure a new visa to come back in. And then those folks, it sounds like another unique set of problems. While, the issue still is administrative processing, you're sort of having to loop in a ton of your sort of broader HR team or management team to manage, like, what are we going to do when this person's used up PTO, is now on a leave, can't be working because we have all these other policies where they shouldn't be bringing equipment. Is that a written policy? Are you leading those conversations? I mean, because it's sort of like the source is immigration of the issue, but it sort of is so broad of, their employment status with UMass Chan. So, gosh, what does that look like? Can you give us, high level anecdotes of, when things have gone wrong and steered it back or prevented it from going wrong?
Right. So, a recent case, we do ask that all employees register their travel we have a
Cool.
travel registry. And for our visa holders, we ask they report their travel to our office. Now, there are times where a student or employee forgets. So we had a situation where someone didn't report their time. They're outside the US, they're stuck in administrative processing, they took a laptop with them.
Yikes.
And it comes down to, how are they reporting their time? Are they
Right.
working? Who's monitoring that? And then once the employee finally cleared and returned to university, information systems had to do a scan of their laptop. So we do have this guide in writing, but again, it's multiple stakeholders. There's the immigration piece, but then there was the timekeeping piece, and then there's information systems wanting to make sure that this person who had access from abroad, what were they accessing? And it's not even just abroad. It's not this general word abroad. It comes down to the specific country, the state, and even the city where they might be logging in, because there's different levels of concern. So it's just multiple pieces involved, and just really working well with each other and making sure we're keeping each other updated to say, we just locked up an employee who's stuck. What
Yeah.
do we do now?
And it kind of starts sort of with your policies or the way you're able to reach your foreign national population effectively, which we'll talk about in a minute, to make sure they know to log or check in about their international travel, right? So that they can sort of see all the policies. And so it's sort of like this uphill battle to make sure they're aware of these policies that, like, you as the director of immigration services here for UMass Chan knows that there even is a policy, right? So sometimes
Right.
it's like, are we, you could be sending out emails where you're like, are they reading them?
Yeah.
And that it kind of is this domino effect of, now, you didn't cause, or there's no sort of way to prevent administrative processing, but there certainly is like the proactive check-ins along the way that, like, that laptop shouldn't have left the US. Uh, and this
Exactly.
and this comes up a lot in corporate America too, where there's just definitely policies where, employees are not allowed to bring laptops outside the US, but folks just like don't know, or, it's good intentions. They want to be able to log in, check email, keep up with things while they're on PTO or an emergency trip, but it can really cause some significant challenges that they don't know about, even within their, good intentions.
Right. And the other challenge too is, going back to administrative processing under the J1 regulations, J1 exchange visitor can only spend no more than 40% of their time remotely. So 60% of their time should be on site. And I bring that up because how can I argue that you're meeting your program objectives when you're stuck abroad?
Yeah.
There is a function in CVIS we can use called the out of country function, but it's really for an exchange visitor who maybe has a project abroad. They're meeting their program objectives. Administrative processing doesn't meet that criteria.
Right.
So there's that added layer right there.
I wouldn't even know that. I don't handle J1s a tremendous amount. So speaking to an expert like you, it's like, dang, that would be, yeah, like another layer of, can you even keep them maintaining their status, or will we have maintenance of status issues if they have to extend their J1?
Right.
Yikes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So something super small can be this huge issue.
it is. And it's, I'm hearing from current and former consular officials when it comes for the interview that it is a visa interview, not a document review. And so
Sure.
when we're finding out about people getting stuck in administrative processing is when I'm going back and saying, well, what questions were asked? How did
Sure.
you answer? And were you asked to show documents? And if so, what did you produce? Because that can also be the issue, is not understanding what's being requested or shoving something under the glass when they weren't asked to. So that's the other complication. And hence why I'd love to see an expansion of the domestic visa renewal program.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that would be one of the biggest pieces that could help all employers to keep business as usual, because, yeah, there's going to be events where researchers, employees, like, have to depart the US for family. We want them, to see sick family members, attend conferences, live their lives. And the fact that they're getting held up at these consular posts is really, really challenging for really great institutions to keep doing the research, keep doing the work for business as usual. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's high on the Christmas wish list to get 2025. Absolutely. Do you want to shift gears a little bit to talk about, successful program communication strategies? Because I think this goes hand in hand. We were talking about how, the policy on the books at your organization is, of course, to check in before international travel, but it requires that message and that policy is understood and that you're able to reach these foreign nationals to engage them. And I know in our prep call, you talked a lot about some interesting avenues you're taking. You've done some really cool like feedback listening sessions. So tell us what you've done in the last couple of years to meet the employees where they're at and communicate with them through channels that they're, listening to, I suppose.
Right. So while I was at the med school about 9 years before I moved into my role as director, I try to look at my role with fresh eyes. And the way you do that is by having dialogue with the community that you support. And so I decided to have focus groups. And I came up with questions that I tried to tie it based on the life cycle of these employees. I wanted it to be focused on those who were newly arrived in F and J status, but also those who maybe had been at the med school a long time and maybe at this point were holding H-1B status or had taken significant steps towards a green card. And I kept the focus groups very small because I wanted it to be an opportunity for everyone to feel comfortable and sharing their opinions and a safe space to, talk about their needs or how things could be done better. And I offered them both remotely and in person. And then I shared the feedback with HR leadership. And for me, I think at least every year or every 2 years, I plan on doing these focus groups because things change over time. But one of the things that came out of the focus groups is that this generation, and I think the future generations, they want pretty easy access to information.
For sure.
So I know you mentioned earlier sending emails. Do people read them? We have a listserv that we use to send important immigration information. We try not to clog anyone's inbox, but immigration updates or even, fun events. But what we heard from this population is that they like social media as a way to receive these updates. So we created social media handles. We're now on Instagram and X. Do I have to say formerly Twitter? I don't know how I'm supposed to brand that.
I think you got it. Yeah.
So, but what we did too is we hired a high school intern, and that was one of her areas of expertise because she's on social media as well. So she helped us build up these social media platforms, and we were using it as a way to send out did you know type of emails or even something fun. Like I'm trying to collect immigration stories from our community. And this is a little bit more traditional to higher ed. We do coffee hours with the community that we support, advertising those events. And from what we hear and we're checking, we're having a lot of followers, and this is how they enjoy getting their information.
Yeah, that's great because you're sort of putting through the headlines and then like they can dig deeper, I'm sure, on your internal, intranets website where there's, more detailed because, immigration can't be boiled down into a tweet, but like, that's sort of the entry point of like, here's a deadline or here's the coffee hour or whatever, and that it looks good. And you've got this intern creating, nice graphics that are interesting and engaging and that, yeah, you're meeting the people where they're at. I think it's amazing that you approach the position with fresh eyes. I think that's, unique and not everybody has that enthusiasm or perspective. And then taking feedback and acting on it that, you could easily be like, oh, Twitter, like whatever. But you're like, no, this is what they want. We're going to meet them where they're at and we're going to get the information. I think that's amazing because, yeah, you're doing high volume in-house. It's a tremendous amount of work. And I know I've talked on the podcast before that like, reaching people, creating strong internal reference documents is super important. That's tailored to your population. And it sounds like you've been doing some of that development. So we kind of want to hear what's been successful in your sort of reference library and what that looks like for your program.
Right. So I think too, trying to just have fun. And that's why I brought up the coffee hours and the potlucks, because sometimes you just want to take a break from immigration. I'm sure you agree. It can be overwhelming. And so it's just nice to get to know our population on a social level. And we're actually organizing these with some of our colleagues in the Employee Assistance Program because we want to also highlight the other places in HR that are here to support them. We're also doing events with our postdoc association. So it's just a nice way for us to work together. One of the other things I did, and not so much for the population, but more for my colleagues in HR, was I had put together, because my team is relatively new and many of my colleagues in HR are new. And I wanted to come up with a way that would make the processes as part of the hiring process or the promotion process a little easier to understand from an immigration perspective. So I put together this visa chart, and it really lists the most commonly used visa categories at the medical school, why we use them, an example of some HR titles that may qualify for each of these roles, and then some information on processing times, any applicable filing fees or Department of State concerns. And I shared it with my colleagues in talent and compensation because they're on the front lines.
Right.
With someone that's being hired or again during the promotion process. So just so they have an understanding of maybe why we may be saying, well, we can't sponsor this person for H-1B because they're this entry-level role, or, they qualify for future sponsorship once they get promoted to X role. And what I heard back from my colleagues is really how helpful it is for them. And it's not their job to become immigration experts. I would never expect that out of them. But I think just having that understanding, and it's, a little visual chart too, which I think is a little easier to read. And so that's been really helpful. And, my team, we try to have these conversations with departments at the time of hire, letting them know if someone's arriving in OPT status, if we can find out based on the documentation they provide, whether or not they qualify for that STEM extension. We want to be proactive and have those conversations now. So as we're monitoring their work authorization, they're not in a situation where they don't qualify for the 24-month STEM extension, but we can't move them into an H-1B because they haven't been promoted into a role that qualifies.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember when we were talking this internal document, because you're managing this in-house program, your stakeholders are not only the foreign national you're securing and maintaining their work authorization, but also, like you said, talent acquisition and benefits that are supporting, the onboarding and the promotion process for the foreign nationals. So, yeah, I think that's a great reference document because most people just want a high level answer from, the talent acquisition or promotion, like how long, how much is it going to cost? And is it like, yes, no, like they want things to be black and white, which there's always like the maybe, there's always the gray area, but at least gives them the high level. So when they're having the conversation, they have some idea of where things are headed because they want that answer immediately. And there's no way your team can just be available within 2 seconds to answer. It's like, no, they created this chart. It'll get them initially through that first conversation. And then, we can dig deeper when we've moved, the candidate to the final round interview or whatever it might be. So that's awesome. And I think, encouraging other folks to ping me with any questions about what internal documentation your company could benefit from, because I know this tension comes up a lot when you're working with a team that might be new. It's also a nice way to sort of have this policy documented, right? Because it sounds like you've got some promotionary pathways and some requirements for sponsorship. And so having this internal document kind of enforcing those policies is also huge, because if there's any turnover, you've got this policy document, this reference document that sort of is there to train the new folks that roll on. So kudos, Melissa. I'm sure that was a tremendous lift for you and your team to develop.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. And, again, we're not an industry where maybe we have offices around the world where these situations may come up, and maybe you park an employee abroad until they gain those skills needed to come back, either that under that H-1B, or we don't have an L-1 program. So we're also limited as to how many visa categories are available to sponsor someone. So this is why, again, it's just important for us to try to have these conversations as much as possible up front. So we're not in situations when the person's 6 months out to their OPT ending and saying, sorry, you can't stay here and maybe you want to go back to school. What are your options beyond that?
Yeah, totally. It sounds like you've had a really thoughtful policy development. A question I get from folks in the industry is, how frequently should I be updating or reviewing my policy? Do you have any thoughts on that, or how you're approaching your policy review
Right.
for?
I'm actually reviewing ours as we speak, and we're changing it from a policy to guides because
Okay.
policy seems so frozen in time and a little bit more stringent to change. So we're coming up more with guides. And in
Right.
my
Like that.
opinion, I think these should be checked every year because
Okay.
we know that immigration is a reaction to the elections. It's going to
Right.
be, right, a reaction to the economy. So maybe what's true today makes sense for example, H-1B sponsorship or green card sponsorship. I mean, last year, we never put the NIW on retainer. Why wouldn't we? It's a self-petition. But now it's the way we're going that we're having conversations as to, do we put that on retainer now? Like, this is the theme that we're seeing. So I
Sure.
think checking in every year would be the best way to stay on top of your policies and guides.
Yeah, thanks for that insight. I think so too. I think it just can be so intimidating because it seems like by the time you've updated your guides, I also like that updated term, and roll it out for the next year, that you're looking at it again 6 months later. So I think some people just get a little tired, but I do think you're exactly right. Like, especially we're coming up on an election, like there's going to be changes in adjudication policies. And so, like, taking a look at your sponsorships, what you're focusing on, adding NIW, maybe 2025 will need to, NIW might not be as available because some of those policies under the current Biden administration may go away or maybe expanded.
Right.
Hard to know right now.
Who knows?
Yeah. But yeah, like kind of needing to have that dynamic ability to adjust to support your population and have a guide to support your answer. Because you never want to be the bad guy. Like, I don't think so. It's like, no, we've created this policy. It's gone through its process. It's gone through the approval of all the stakeholders. So this is where we're at. The last question I kind of want us to wrap up on is, what does success look like for your program? So you're the director of this, like, again, very large, complex program. And how are you defining success for it?
Right. So data is one thing, not missing deadlines, of course, staying on top of cases, that's the obvious, but our community, and when I say community, not just international, I mean domestic and international, have the opportunity to give anyone in HR what's called an HR shout out. And these shout outs are read during our quarterly in-person HR meetings. And since I've been in my role, every quarterly meeting, I hear these amazing shout outs to my team. And I'm blown away because it can be a department chair, a principal investigator, it can be another colleague in HR, and it can be a new student or a new scholar that are just praising my team. And that means a lot to me. And again, data is always important, but just to hear that our community is so happy with the services and that we go above and beyond. And it's really hard because it's a community that, sure, our job is to monitor their status, but sometimes they need a little bit more of hand holding. Being newly arriving in the US, how do you apply for a social security number? How do you open a bank account? Our healthcare system's complicated. There's so many other pieces beyond saying, okay, we give you a travel signature on your DS 2019, or we extended your H-1B. Here's your approval notice. Have a good day. There's so many additional pieces to advising and support that we provide. And I feel like it's being recognized by the community that we support.
That's amazing. I'm hearing that, you're lifting up your team and cheering them on to succeed and to provide good support, and that the support doesn't just end at securing the status. It's all about making sure that newly arrived employee knows how to navigate a new life in Massachusetts and Boston, how to get the driver's license. No one likes going to the DMV, right? And
I don't.
yeah. It might even be worse than immigration. And to help them through those like tough things, even though technically the sort of main responsibility has ended. That's fantastic to hear, and it sounds like the community is loving that additional support. Amazing, Melissa. I learned so much. I love the term guides. I'm going to be using that. Thanks so much. I think we're going to wrap here, but do you have any final words and let our listeners know how they can connect with you further after listening?
Absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am a huge fan of networking and benchmarking. And I'm going to give a shout out to this business immigration benchmarking podcast that you do, Laura, because it's a great way for me to learn better ways to run my program. And so anyone who's interested in doing the same, the way I look at it, it doesn't matter how big your visa program is. If you're an industry or higher ed, we're still supporting the same community. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And honestly, our success at the medical school is because of my team. I just want to give a shout out to them. We have a combined over 60 years of experience, and my team is just, not only are they skilled in what they do, but the empathy that they have, the emotional intelligence that they have, I don't think that can be learned. You
Amazing.
you can go to school for whatever degree, but those are really special skills to have. And so a big shout out to all of them, because they are the big reason why we are doing as well as we're doing at the medical school.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Laura.